hill on the left is Prospect House. This was opened as the offices of the Eastern Counties newspapers in 1970. In 2002, the company became Archant and continues to publish the Eastern Daily Press and the Norwich Evening News, amongst other titles. The sculpture near the entrance is called Public Sculpture and is by Bernard Meadows. Heading down Cattle Market Street, the first building on the right is the Old Drill Hall, the home of the Norfolk Yeomanry, and then in about 1910 the home of the 6th Cyclist Battalion of the Norfolk Regiment. Next to this is Crystal House, which was built by Holmes and Son in 1863 to display their steam engines. The glass and metal frontage is said to have been inspired by the Great Exhibition of 1851. Keeping left, the ornate frontage of the car park was once part of the Duke's Palace Bridge. When Duke Street was widened in 1972, the listed ironwork was saved and installed here in 1992. The Castle Quarter was initially known as Castle Mall. The Shire Hall chambers were built in 1907 and have the Norfolk crest clearly on the side of the building. The present Shire Hall, now the Norwich Castle Study Centre, dates from the 1820s. Originally, this building was built to provide court facilities for the whole of the county. The Royal Norfolk Regimental Museum occupied the building for a short period in the 1990s. The Boer War Memorial was created by the sculptor George Wade and erected in 1904. It depicts the Angel of Peace replacing her sword after conflict on top of a granite and Portland stone plinth. Around this busy junction stand 3 impressive buildings. The Gurney Bank was the headquarters of the Norwich-based bank that became part of the Berkeley Empire in 1896. The Royal Hotel was opened in 1897 and is architecturally a cross between a French chateau and a Scottish castle. Agricultural Hall opened in 1882 as an exhibition hall staging everything from cattle shows through to military tattoos and lectures by such as Oscar Wilde and Jerome K. Jerome. Since 1958 it has been the home of Anglia Television. Tombland was the heart of the early settlement, the name deriving from the Scandinavian word for open space. The market was sited here until the Normans moved it to the current position in view of the castle. The Ethelbert Gate is one of 2 gates that lead into the Cathedral Close from Tombland. It dates from 1320, although it is likely that it was rebuilt from a previous structure. A chapel originally occupied the upper floor. The upper exterior of the gate is an excellent example of flush flint work. Originally unveiled in 1854 and standing on Gentleman's Walk looking up Davy Place towards the castle, the Statue of Wellington was moved in 1937, whilst Nelson spent 3 years at the east end of the Guildhall before moving to the close in 1856. He faces the chapel of his former school, the Norwich School. The Mother and Child sculpture by George Fullard was installed in 1978. The arms of Thomas Erpingham, one of the most powerful men in late 14th century Norwich, can be seen over the gate that bears his name. The chapel of St John the Evangelist stands on the site of an earlier charnel house that stored exhumed bones from the local graveyards. Built in 1316, the undercroft of the chapel continued to house bones, and the low circular windows allowed people to see these remains. The Norwich Grammar School moved to the chapel in 1553, and the building has been part of that institution ever since. The foundation stone of Norwich Cathedral was laid in 1096 by Bishop Herbert de Lozinga. Most of the stone used came from Normandy and was brought by sea to Great Yarmouth and then via the rivers Yare and Wensum to a specially constructed canal running from what is now Paul's Ferry along Ferry Lane. The present spire was completed in 1480 after previous wooden structures had been damaged by the elements. Norwich Cathedral was one of the first to form a supporters group, the Friends of Norwich Cathedral, in the 1930s. and one of the most recent additions to the building is the refectory, which was opened in 2004. Close by the cathedral is the grave of Nurse Edith Cavell, who was shot by the Germans in 1915. She'd helped more than 200 Allies escape in Belgium and assisted many more wounded from both sides of the conflict. Bishop Walter de Suffield founded the Great Hospital in 1249 for the benefit of aged priests, poor scholars, and sick and hungry paupers. Today the hospital continues to offer care in sheltered accommodation and is also an event centre. When St Helen's Church became part of the Great Hospital in 1270, it was on the opposite side of the road, so was demolished and rebuilt in the hospital grounds. The Bishop's Bridge was built around 1340 and originally had a gatehouse at the western end. To the left of the central arch there are remains of fortified turrets and carved above it the city arms. On the opposite side of Riverside Road there is the site of Lollard's Pit. Paul's Ferry is named after John Paul, who ran the ferry in the early 19th century. The archway is a 15th century watergate and spans what once was a canal built to move stone used in the construction of the cathedral. Ferry Lane returns us to the Close and its wealth of interesting architecture. The almshouses on Recorder Road and the gardens opposite were built in 1915 in memory of James Stuart by the Coleman family. James had married into the family, and from the death of Jeremiah Coleman in 1898, he had run the family business in Carrow. Construction of Prince of Wales Road began in 1860. It was opened in 1862 to provide a grand and direct link from Thorpe Station to the city centre, cutting through the historic site of the orchards and hop fields of a former Franciscan friary. Many of the buildings on the north side give a grand impression, whilst the south side is generally more typical of an average Victorian shopping street. Hardwick House began life in 1866 as the Crown Bank, but became the main post office in 1875, and then part of Anglia Television in the 1970s. It is said to represent a tiered wedding cake. Tudor Hall was built between 1898 and 1900 as the head office of the engineering company Bolton & Paul, which had a large factory on Rose Lane. It uses features from 16th century properties that stood in King Street. On reaching Mountergate, to your left is an example of a 16th century weaver's house, with a second-storey frieze window allowing light into the working area. The building has recently been refurbished and converted to apartments, with an adjoining extension built. Behind this stands St Faith's House. Further along, at the site of what is now a car park, stood the original Norwich Fish Market. Moving towards King Street, you pass a section of wall that was originally part of the Bolton and Paul engineering site and later became the cooperative shoe factory. The wall survived only as a sound baffle against traffic noise when this was a through road for the apartments that form Parmentergate Court. St Peter Parmentergate was once a thriving church in a prosperous part of the city. It was made redundant in 1981. The name is most likely a derivation of Parmountergate or by Mountergate, the gate being one at the foot of the castle mound. It might also be linked to Adrian Parmenter, Mayor of Norwich in 1641.